In the sterile, high-stakes world of private aviation, appearances can be dangerously deceptive. A single snap judgment born from prejudice and arrogance is about to cost a multi-million-dollar airline more than just money. It's about to cost them their reputation, their future, and one pilot his entire career. This isn't just a story about a conflict at 30,000 feet. It's the story of Dr. Althea Grant, a woman who, when told she didn't belong in the front of the plane, calmly reminded everyone that she owned the sky itself. What happens when the quietest person in the room holds all the power? A storm is about to be unleashed, not from the heavens, but from a single devastating phone call. The air in the Onyx Wing private terminal at Teterboro Airport hummed with a unique frequency, a blend of polished silence and the low thrum of immense financial power. It was an environment designed to be invisible, a seamless transition from a black car on the tarmac to a leather seat in the sky. It smelled of freshly brewed espresso, expensive perfume, and the faint, clean scent of jet fuel that clung to the air like a promise of imminent departure. Dr. Althea Grant sat in a plush armchair in a secluded corner, the cool glass of a sparkling water sweating onto the coaster beside her. To the casual observer, she was an anomaly in this gilded waiting area. She wore a simple charcoal grey hoodie, comfortable black joggers, and a pair of well-worn but clean Nike trainers. Her hair was pulled back in a neat, intricate braid that fell down her back. Her face, devoid of makeup, was focused intently on the screen of her sleek laptop, where complex schematics and logistics charts shifted and reformed under the rapid, silent clicks of her touchpad. She was the ghost in this machine of luxury. The other passengers, a trio of men in sharply tailored suits, spoke in hushed, important tones about mergers and market caps, occasionally glancing her way, with looks that ranged from mild curiosity to faint, unvoiced disapproval. They saw a young black woman in casual wear, and their minds filled in a story, a celebrity's assistant, perhaps, or a musician's girlfriend. The possibility that she was the principal passenger, the one upon whose schedule their own departure depended, never entered the finely tuned calculus of their assumptions. Althea was used to it. In fact, she cultivated it. Anonymity was a form of armor in her world. At 42, she was the founder and CEO of AeroGrant Logistics, a titan in the rarefied field of global supply chain management for aerospace and defense contractors. The name on her ticket, the name on the charter agreement, the name that guaranteed the 8-figure contract that kept this very jet in the air, was hers. The flight today, a direct route to Zurich, was critical. She was en route to finalize a deal that would vertically integrate a new proprietary guidance system into the fleets of a European consortium, a deal worth more than the GDP of a small nation. The flight was chartered through Skylink Executive Charters, a firm with a reputation for impeccable service and discretion. Althea had been a loyal client for 3 years, their contract representing nearly 15% of Skylink's annual revenue. A crisp uniformed agent approached her. "Dr. Grant, we are ready for you to board." Althea nodded, closing her laptop and slipping it into her worn leather backpack. She slung it over one shoulder and walked towards the door leading to the tarmac, her footsteps silent on the marble floor. The trio of suits followed their conversation, ceasing as they fell in line behind her, their own assumptions momentarily short-circuited by the agent addressing her by name. The jet, a Gulfstream G650, gleamed under the morning sun. Its lines were sleek, powerful, a testament to engineering and wealth. She ascended the stairs and was greeted at the door by a flight attendant with a practiced, polished smile. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," the attendant, whose name tag read Sarah, said. Her eyes flickered for a fraction of a second over Althea's attire before settling back on her face. "May I see your boarding pass?" Althea presented the pass on her phone. The seat assignment was clear, 1A. The prime seat in the cabin, a spacious, swiveling throne of cream-coloured leather with its own private window and direct access to the aisle. "Of course," Sarah said, her smile tightening, almost imperceptibly. "Right this way." Althea settled into seat 1, the leather sighing under her weight. She placed her backpack under the seat in front of her, pulled out a thick binder filled with technical documents, and immediately immersed herself in her work. The other passengers boarded, taking their seats further back in the cabin. The soft murmur of their voices was a distant buzz easily ignored. The cabin door was sealed with a satisfying, pressurized hiss. The jet began its slow, deliberate taxi towards the runway. Everything was proceeding as it should. The hum of the engines was a familiar lullaby, the precursor to a productive 8 hours of work in the air. Just as the jet paused at the threshold of the runway, awaiting clearance for takeoff, Sarah, the flight attendant, appeared at her side. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her voice a little too loud in the quiet cabin. Althea looked up from her papers, her focus broken. "Yes. I'm so sorry, but I believe there's been a mistake." Sarah began wringing her hands slightly. "This seat is reserved." Althea blinked slowly. "Yes, it's reserved for me. Althea Grant. Seat 1A. She gestured to the pass, still visible on her phone screen. Sarah glanced at the phone, then back at Althea, a flicker of genuine confusion mixed with discomfort in her eyes. "I understand, but the captain has noted a potential discrepancy with the passenger manifest. He seems to think this seat was intended for one of the other gentlemen." She gestured vaguely towards the suited men further back. Althea felt a familiar, weary coldness creep into her chest. It was a feeling she'd known her whole life, the subtle but unmistakable sting of being questioned, of being told she was in the wrong place. She kept her voice even professional. "There is no discrepancy. I am the lead passenger on this charter. The seat is correct. Please inform the captain that we are cleared for departure." Sarah looked mortified, caught between a passenger's firm assertion and a captain's authority. She stammered, I can't do that, ma'am. The captain was very specific. He needs to personally verify the first row seating. He asked if you wouldn't mind moving to seat 4B for takeoff just until we can sort this out." Seat 4B was a smaller seat by the galley with less legroom. It was an unmistakable downgrade. It wasn't about the seat itself. It was about the implication, the dismissal, the casual assumption that she, of all people, was the one out of place. "No," Althea said, her voice dropping to a quiet but unyielding firmness. "I will not be moving. I will be staying right here in the seat I purchased. Please convey that to your captain. And while you're at it, you can tell him that his delay is now costing my company approximately $50,000 a minute." The flight attendant's face paled. She scurried away towards the cockpit, leaving a wake of stunned silence. The men in suits were now watching openly, their expressions a mixture of intrigue and annoyance at the delay. Althea ignored them, turning her gaze out the window to the runway, her jaw set. The quiet ascent had just hit its first and most turbulent patch of air. The cockpit of a G650 is a sanctuary of technology and authority. It's a space where the captain's word is law, backed by thousands of hours of training and the immense responsibility of the lives and machinery in his hands. Captain Richard "Rick" Thorne felt that authority in his bones. He was a man in his late 50s with a silvering crew cut a perpetually tanned face and the easy, unshakable confidence of someone who had never been seriously questioned. He saw the world in terms of checklists, procedures, and a rigid hierarchy. He was the commander. First Officer David Chen, a sharp younger pilot in his early 30s, sat to his right, running through the final pre-flight checks. He was meticulous, quiet, and observant. The cockpit door hissed open, and Sarah leaned in her face, flushed. "Captain Thorne, the passenger in 1A, she refuses to move." Thorne didn't even look at her. His eyes were fixed on the runway ahead. "Refuses." "It's not a request, Sarah. It's a matter of operational procedure. Tell her the lead passenger on the manifest, a Dr. A. Grant, is assigned to that seat, and we need to verify." "She says she is Dr. Grant," Sarah whispered, twisting the fabric of her uniform. "She showed me her pass. She also said this delay is costing her company $50,000 a minute." Thorne finally turned his head, a smirk playing on his lips. He exchanged a look with David. $50 grand a minute, is she a comedian? What's she look like?" "She's a black woman," Sarah said, lowering her voice further. "She's dressed very casually. Hoodie joggers." Thorne's smirk solidified into a look of condescending certainty. He'd seen it 100 times. Entourage members, personal assistants, significant others who got a little too comfortable with the perks. They didn't understand the structure, the unwritten rules of this world. The real players, the ones who signed the checks, looked the part. They wore the suits, the expensive watches. This woman was an administrative error, a misplaced piece on the board. "Right," Thorne grunted, unclipping his harness. "Amateurs. I'll handle it. David, tell the tower we're holding our position." David Chen hesitated. "Captain her pass says Grant. Maybe we should just... I'm not taking off until my cabin is in order." First Officer Thorne cut him off, his voice edged with steel. "There's a reason we have protocols. Weight and balance security manifests. I'm not having some unknown variable in the most critical seat on the plane. I'll be 2 minutes." He pushed past Sarah and strode into the cabin. The atmosphere, already tense, grew thick with his presence. He was not a large man, but he carried himself with the unassailable aura of command. He bypassed the other passengers, his eyes zeroing in on Althea in seat 1A. He stopped beside her, planting his feet in a wide, authoritative stance. He didn't address her directly at first, instead speaking to the cabin at large. "Ladies and gentlemen, apologies for the slight delay. We're just sorting out a small seating issue, and we'll be on our way momentarily." Then he looked down at Althea. His voice was patronizing, the kind one might use with a confused child. "Miss, I'm Captain Thorne. There seems to be some confusion about your seat." Althea slowly placed her binder on the empty seat beside her and met his gaze. Her eyes were calm, but they held a penetrating intelligence that seemed to momentarily unnerve him. "Captain, there is no confusion. I am Dr. Althea Grant. This is my seat. We are late." Thorne's practiced smile didn't falter, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial yet demeaning tone. "Listen, I appreciate you're trying to help, but the manifest is very clear. This seat row 1 is for the principal client. I've been flying executives for 20 years. I know what they look like." The insult hung in the air as thick and noxious as exhaust fumes. He hadn't said it directly, but the meaning was crystal clear. You are not one of them. You don't look the part. You don't belong here. Althea's calm demeanor remained unbroken, a placid lake over a churning abyss. "And I have been signing the checks that pay your salary for 3 years. I know what a principal client is. I am one." Thorne's patience, thin to begin with, snapped. The facade of politeness fell away, revealing the raw, ugly prejudice beneath. His voice became hard-clipped. "I have final authority on this aircraft, and I am telling you that you are not sitting in this seat for takeoff. You can either move to 4B now, or we can deplane you and sort this out with airport security on the ground. It's your choice. It was a direct challenge, a public humiliation, delivered with the full force of his perceived authority. The suited men were now staring rapt. Sarah stood frozen by the galley, her face a mask of horror. First Officer Chen had appeared in the cockpit doorway, his expression deeply troubled. Althea held the captain's gaze for a long moment. The hum of the auxiliary power unit seemed to grow louder, filling the silence. The world narrowed to the space between the two of them, the immovable object and the man who believed himself to be the unstoppable force. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I see," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "You've made your position very clear, Captain." For a second, Thorne looked smug, victorious. He believed she was capitulating. He had asserted his dominance and won. Then Althea reached into her backpack and pulled out her cell phone. She tapped the screen a few times, her movements fluid and economical. She put the phone to her ear. "What are you doing?" Thorne demanded, his tone sharp. "Cellular devices need to be in airplane mode for departure." Althea ignored him, her eyes fixed on something out the window. The phone connected. "Isabella, it's Althea," she said into the phone, her voice as clear and calm as if she were ordering lunch. "Cancel the Zurich flight. Effective immediately." A beat of silence. "No, there's no emergency. It's a customer service issue. Ground the plane. And Isabella." She continued her gaze, finally shifting from the window, to lock onto Captain Thorne's stunned face. "Terminate our contract with Skylink Charters, all of them. The master service agreement, the fleet allocation, everything. Use the breach of conduct clause, section 7, paragraph B. The one about crew professionalism and endangerment of client relations. And please have a car from Apex Global, ready for me back at the terminal in 15 minutes. I have a call to make." She ended the call and placed the phone face down on the armrest. She looked up at the utterly bewildered Captain Thorne, whose face had drained of all color. "It appears, Captain," she said, her voice quiet, but ringing with the finality of a death knell, "that we won't be departing after all. You might want to inform the tower." The silence that followed Althea's words was more profound than the absence of sound. It was a vacuum sucking the air and the arrogance out of the cabin. Captain Thorne stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. The words, "terminate our contract," echoed in the confined space, ricocheting off the polished wood veneers and the stunned faces of the passengers. He was a man who operated on procedure on a known set of variables. This was an equation he had never encountered. First Officer David Chen was the first to react. He stepped fully into the cabin, his eyes wide, looking from Althea to his captain. He had heard every word. He understood the magnitude of what had just happened, in a way Thorne, still reeling from the personal affront, could not yet grasp. "Captain," David said, his voice low and urgent. "What did she say?" Thorne shook his head, as if to clear water from his ears. "She's bluffing," he whispered, though the conviction in his own voice was rapidly evaporating. "She's just some disgruntled assistant trying to make a scene." Althea let out a soft, humorless laugh. "A bluff, Captain. My company, Aerogrant Logistics, has a 7-year, $90 million exclusive charter agreement with your employer, Skylink. Or rather, we had one. As of about 90 seconds ago, that agreement is void. My assistant, Isabella Rossi, is likely on the phone with your CEO, Robert Caldwell, as we speak. I assure you he does not think I am bluffing." Each word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing Thorne's blustering denial. The name Robert Caldwell and the figure $90 million landed with the force of a physical blow. The trio of suits in the back of the cabin exchanged wide-eyed, panicked glances. They worked in a world of high finance. They knew that numbers like that weren't thrown around lightly. One of them, a man named Henderson, discreetly began typing into his phone. He had a meeting in Zurich too, and he was suddenly realizing it was in jeopardy for reasons far more serious than a simple seating dispute. Sarah, the flight attendant, looked as if she were about to faint. Her career was flashing before her eyes. She had followed her captain's orders, but she had been the one to initially challenge the most important client her airline had. Thorne, his face now a ghastly shade of pale, finally seemed to process the reality of the situation. The chain of command he held so sacred was suddenly inverted. He wasn't the king of this small metal kingdom. He was a frontline employee who had, just through sheer hubris, detonated a financial bomb in the heart of his own company. Now wait a minute. He stammered, the authority completely gone from his voice. It was replaced by a desperate, pleading tone. "Dr. Grant, I apologize. There's been a misunderstanding. I was just following procedure for passenger verification." "No, Captain," Althea corrected him coolly, already gathering her belongings. "You were following your prejudice. You made an assumption based on my gender, my race, and my clothing. You didn't see a client. You saw someone you felt didn't belong. You didn't seek to clarify, you sought to command. You publicly humiliated me, and you questioned my integrity. That is not a misunderstanding. It's a profound failure of judgment and professionalism." She stood up, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. She was no longer just a woman in a hoodie. She was a pillar of righteous indignation, her quiet demeanor now radiating an intensity that made everyone else in the cabin shrink back. "Your procedure," she continued, "has just cost Skylink its largest private contract. It has cost these other gentlemen," she gestured to the suits, "their timely arrival in Zurich, and it will, I imagine, cost you your command." The jet's satellite phone, mounted near the galley, began to ring, with a shrill, insistent chirp that cut through the tension like a siren. Everyone knew who it was. Sarah looked at the phone, then at Thorne, her eyes pleading for guidance. Thorne stared at the ringing phone as if it were a venomous snake. He couldn't move. First Officer Chen stepped forward. "I'll get it," he said quietly, and answered the call. First Officer Chen speaking. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell." "Yes, sir, she is. I understand." "Yes, sir." He held the phone out to Captain Thorne, his expression grim. "It's for you." Thorne took the receiver with a trembling hand. He held it to his ear, his face ashen. "Caldwell." "Yes, Robert, I can explain." Althea didn't wait to hear the explanation. She walked to the cabin door. "First Officer," she said, her voice crisp and clear, "please open this door. I'll be deplaning now." David Chen, without a moment's hesitation, and without looking at his captain for permission, moved to the main cabin door and began the procedure to disarm the emergency slide and unlock it. The chain of command on Skylink Flight 7112 had officially and irrevocably shifted. As the heavy door unsealed with a gasp of depressurization, letting in the sounds and smells of the active airfield, Althea paused on the threshold. She looked back one last time at the scene of chaos she had wrought with a single phone call. Thorne was slumped against the bulkhead, the phone receiver limp in his hand, his face a mask of utter devastation. Sarah was weeping silently by the galley. The other passengers were muttering already on their own phones, rearranging their plans. This wasn't an act of petulance. It was a calculated strategic demolition, a demonstration of power that had been unsheathed, not out of anger but out of necessity. She had built her empire in a world that constantly underestimated her. Today, Captain Richard Thorne had learned in the most brutal way imaginable just how vast that empire truly was. She descended the stairs, her Nikes making soft sounds on the metal steps, and walked across the tarmac toward the terminal, not once looking back. A sleek black sedan was already pulling up to meet her, its logo gleaming in the sun, Apex Global Aviation. her new partners. The moment Althea Grant's feet touched the tarmac, the consequences began to ripple outwards with the speed of a shockwave. Inside the Onyx Wing terminal, Isabella Rossi had been ruthlessly efficient. Before Althea had even reached the waiting apex, sedan emails had been fired off, clauses had been invoked, and a $90 million river of revenue had been instantly diverted from Skylink's accounts. On board the now grounded G650 Chaos reigned. Robert Caldwell's voice had come through the satellite phone, not with a roar, but with a terrifying, deathly calm that was far more frightening. Richard, he had said the use of Thorne's first name, a chilling intimacy. I want you to listen to me very carefully. You will not speak another word to Dr. Grant. You will not move that aircraft. You will wait for a replacement crew. Your flight privileges are suspended effective immediately. You will report to my office at 800 tomorrow, and you had better bring your union representative. The line had gone dead. Thorne was left in a state of catatonic shock. The world he had commanded with such certainty had crumbled to dust in less than 10 minutes. The other passengers, led by Mr. Henderson, were now on their feet, demanding answers. "What the hell is going on?" Henderson barked, his face red with frustration. "My deal in Zurich is time-sensitive. Who was that woman?" First Officer Chen took charge. His voice was steady, a small island of calm in the swirling mess. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to unforeseen crew-related issues, this flight has been cancelled. Please gather your belongings. Skylink will be arranging alternative transportation for you, and a representative will meet you inside the terminal. We sincerely apologize for the inconvenience." "Inconvenience," another passenger scoffed. "This is a catastrophe." The deplaning was a somber, angry affair. As Thorne watched the disgruntled clients file past him, their glares a mixture of pity and contempt, he finally understood. He hadn't just insulted a passenger. He had scuttled a flagship, and now he was going down with the ship. Meanwhile, at the Skylink corporate headquarters in Purchase, New York, Robert Caldwell was presiding over a corporate nightmare. He was a man who lived by the numbers, and the numbers currently flashing on his screen were apocalyptic. The AeroGrant contract wasn't just about the money. It was a prestige account. It was the seal of approval that attracted other high-value clients. Losing it wasn't just a leak. It was a catastrophic hull breach. His phone rang again. It was the CEO of Apex Global Aviation, Jonathan Finch. They were rivals but maintained a professionally cordial relationship. "Robert," Finch said, his voice laced with a predatory sort of sympathy. "Heard you had a bit of an incident over at Teterboro." Caldwell's blood ran cold. The news was already out. The private aviation community was a small, gossipy world. "Jonathan," he said, forcing his voice to remain level, "just wanted to give you a heads up, as a courtesy." Finch continued, the courtesy feeling more like a shark circling. "We just signed an exclusive 5-year partnership with AeroGrant Logistics. Althea Grant is an impressive woman. She drives a hard bargain, but she values good service. We're honored to have her business." Caldwell felt a wave of nausea. Not only had he lost the contract, but it had gone directly to his biggest competitor. Apex would use this as a marketing sledgehammer proof that they were the new gold standard in executive travel, the airline that poached Skylink's crown jewel. "Thanks for the call, Jonathan," Caldwell managed to choke out before hanging up. He slammed his fist on his mahogany desk. A billion-dollar company brought to its knees by one captain's bigotry. He buzzed his assistant. "Get me the full file on Captain Richard Thorne. Commendations, complaints, everything. And get the head of HR and our legal counsel in my office. Now." Sonafustos. Back at Teterboro, Thorne was finally escorted off the plane by a grim-faced operations manager. He wasn't allowed to take his flight bag. He was told it would be sent to him. He was treated like a security risk on his own aircraft. As he walked through the terminal, he saw the new Apex crew, crisp, professional, and diverse, striding confidently towards a different G650, where Dr. Althea Grant was likely already on board her laptop, open back to work, as if nothing had happened. The true groundswell was just beginning. Mr. Henderson, the passenger with the time-sensitive deal, was a managing director at a major investment bank. His bank had a fleet account with Skylink. Within the hour, his furious call to his corporate travel department led to a full and immediate review of their multi-million-dollar contract. The other two passengers' partners at a powerful law firm did the same. The incident was no longer just about Althea Grant. It had become a referendum on Skylink's reliability and professionalism. The story, stripped of names but rich in detail, was already circulating among charter brokers and industry insiders. The narrative was simple and devastating. Skylink had insulted a major client, cancelled a flight on the tarmac, and lost its most important account to its rival, all because a pilot didn't like a passenger's hoodie. As Thorne sat in the sterile, impersonal crew lounge, waiting for the car that would take him home, his phone buzzed. It was a text from a fellow captain. "Rick, what did you do? The whole network is on fire." He stared at the screen, the words blurring. He had spent 30 years building a career, a reputation for being a firm-by-the-book pilot. He had seen himself as a guardian of standards. But now, stripped of his uniform and his authority, he was forced to confront the truth. His standards were a sham, a cover for a deep-seated prejudice he had never acknowledged. He hadn't been protecting the aircraft. He had been protecting his own fragile, outdated vision of what power was supposed to look like. And in doing so, he had burned his entire world to the ground. For Althea Grant, the incident was not an end, but a catalyst. She wasn't a woman who dwelled on insults. She was a strategist who capitalized on opportunities. As her new Apex G650 sliced smoothly through the stratosphere towards Europe, she wasn't stewing in anger. She was working. The phone call she had promised Isabella she would make was to Jonathan Finch, the CEO of Apex. She had met him at an industry conference months ago and had been impressed by his forward-thinking approach to logistics and his company's investment in a modern, fuel-efficient fleet. She had his number saved for just such a contingency. "Jonathan Althea Grant," she'd said once airborne. "I find myself in the market for a new aviation partner. Are you available to discuss a long-term exclusive arrangement?" Finch, a shrewd and decisive leader, understood the gift he was being handed. Within 2 hours of back and forth between him, Althea, and their respective legal teams via encrypted email, the framework of a deal was in place. It was better than the Skylink contract, more favorable rates, guaranteed fleet availability on shorter notice, and a dedicated client management team. Althea had leveraged Skylink's failure into a significant operational and financial upgrade for Aero Grant. It was a cold, calculated, and brilliant business move. Her reckoning was not just punitive, it was profitable. Meanwhile, Richard Thorne's reckoning was just beginning. The next morning, he sat in a leather chair opposite Robert Caldwell's enormous desk. Caldwell's office was a monument to success, with panoramic views of the New York skyline. But today, it felt like an execution chamber. Skylink's head of HR, a stern woman named Eleanor Vance, and their chief legal counsel were also present. "Richard," Caldwell began, his voice devoid of any warmth, "I've reviewed your file. 32 years of service, an exemplary safety record, not a single formal complaint, until yesterday." He slid a tablet across the desk. On the screen was a preliminary incident report. It included statements from the entire crew and the other 3 passengers. First Officer David Chen's statement was concise and damning. He detailed Thorne's dismissive comments in the cockpit about Dr. Grant's appearance, his refusal to heed Chen's suggestion to verify the manifest electronically, and his aggressive, confrontational tone in the cabin. He quoted Thorne's line, "I know what they look like," verbatim. Sarah, the flight attendant, had submitted a tearful, detailed account. She admitted her own initial hesitation, but made it clear she was acting under the captain's direct and insistent orders. She described the public nature of the confrontation and the palpable humiliation inflicted on Dr. Grant. Most damaging of all was the statement from Mr. Henderson. He had no loyalty to Althea Grant. In fact, he was furious with her for cancelling the flight, but he had even less patience for incompetence. His statement was a scathing indictment of Thorne's lack of judgment. The captain's behaviour was unprofessional and discriminatory, he had written. He created a hostile situation, delayed the flight, and ultimately caused its cancellation through his own arrogance. My company will be reconsidering its relationship with Skylink as a result of this operational failure. Caldwell looked at Thorne. The consensus is unanimous, Richard. This was not a procedural issue. This was a personal one. You profiled a passenger. You abused your authority. You failed to de-escalate. In the span of 15 minutes, your actions have directly resulted in the loss of the AeroGrant contract, placed at least 2 other major accounts under review, and have done catastrophic, perhaps irreparable damage to this company's reputation. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Thorne, who had walked in, hoping to argue his case, felt the floor drop out from under him. The evidence was overwhelming, the verdict already decided. He saw the cold, hard business reality in Caldwell's eyes. There was no room for loyalty or long service. There was only the bottom line. It was a mistake, Thorne mumbled, his voice hoarse. A judgment call. I got it wrong. You didn't get it wrong, Richard. Eleanor Vance, the HR director, interjected. You acted on a bias that this company cannot and will not tolerate. We have a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. It's in the code of conduct you sign every year. The legal counsel added the final nail in the coffin. Apex is already spinning this. They're positioning themselves as the modern inclusive choice for executive travel. We're about to be hit with a wave of negative press. We need to demonstrate a swift and decisive response. Our liability here is enormous. Robert Caldwell leaned forward, his hand steepled. Richard, effective immediately, your employment with Skylink Executive Charters is terminated. For cause. You will be escorted from the building. Your credentials will be revoked. We will contest any unemployment claim. Terminated. The word hit Thorne with the force of a physical impact. 32 years of his life, his identity, his pride erased. He had been a Skylink captain. It was who he was. Now he was nothing. A pariah, a cautionary tale. He was escorted out by security, a final, galling humiliation. As he stood on the curb watching the sleek corporate building he once called a second home, he realized the full scope of Althea Grant's power. She hadn't just cancelled a flight. She had reached across time and space and surgically dismantled his entire life. The reckoning was swift, total, and brutally fair. He had judged her and found her wanting. Now the world had judged him, and the verdict was the same. The fallout from Captain Thorne's termination was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of the public crucifixion of Skylink Charters. As the legal counsel had predicted, the story broke, and it broke big. It started on niche aviation forums and blogs like Live and Let's Fly and 1 Mile at a Time. An anonymous source, likely a disgruntled Skylink employee or a chatterbox charter broker, leaked the details. The story was irresistible. Skylink pilot fired after kicking millionaire. Black CEO out of first class. Loses airline. $90 million contract. The headlines wrote themselves. From there, it was a wildfire. Forbes picked it up. Then Bloomberg. The story transcended the business pages and became a mainstream cultural moment, a perfect self-contained parable about race class and corporate comeuppance. Althea Grant's name was now public. Reporters dug into her background, discovering the narrative of a brilliant self-made aerospace engineer who had shattered glass ceilings her entire life. She became an unwilling icon of quiet strength and decisive action. Her company Aero Grant was flooded with positive attention, its brand image burnished to a brilliant shine. For Skylink, the effect was the polar opposite. Their name became synonymous with discrimination and incompetence. On social media, the hashtag #ChuckFlyApex trended, cleverly fanned by Apex Global's marketing team. Skylink's carefully crafted image of discreet elite service was shattered. They were now the airline where a pilot might accost you based on your clothing. Robert Caldwell was in a perpetual state of crisis management. He issued a public apology, a groveling, carefully worded statement about diversity retraining and a renewed commitment to customer service. But the damage was done. The statement was seen as a desperate, reactive move. In the 2 weeks following the incident, Skylink lost 3 more corporate accounts, citing the reputational risk associated with the brand. Their quarterly earnings projections were revised downwards by a staggering 20%. The ripple effect was turning into a tsunami. For Richard Thorne, the public arena was a new kind of hell. Though his name was initially withheld in mainstream reports, it was common knowledge within the tight-knit aviation world. He was a pariah. His phone stopped ringing. Friends he'd known for decades suddenly became distant. The pilots' union provided basic legal support, but they made it clear he was on his own. His actions were indefensible. He tried to find another job. With his experience, he should have been a prime candidate for another charter company or even a major commercial airline. But his name was now toxic. Every potential employer saw the same thing, an immense liability. No one wanted the pilot who had cost his last company $90 million over a seating dispute. The doors, once wide open, were now universally slammed shut. His personal life began to fray. The financial pressure was immense. The loss of his 6-figure salary, combined with the shame and public scorn, put an unbearable strain on his marriage. His wife, who had for years enjoyed the prestige and lifestyle that came with being a top-tier private captain's spouse, now faced a very different reality. The arguments became more frequent, more bitter. He had not just lost his job, he had lost the respect of the one person he thought would always stand by him. He grew bitter and isolated, spending his days replaying the 10 minutes on the tarmac at Teterboro over and over in his mind. He tried to frame himself as the victim, a scapegoat for a company panicking over a lost contract. He told himself he was just following procedure, that Althea Grant had overreacted, that she had been looking for a reason to break the contract. But in the quiet, lonely hours of the night, the truth would surface. He could see her calm, unwavering eyes. He could hear his own condescending voice. He had held all the power in that moment, and he had used it to be cruel. The consequences, he was forced to admit, were of his own making. The ultimate irony came 6 months later. Financially desperate, he finally found a job. It wasn't as a captain. It wasn't even as a first officer on a passenger jet. A small, scrappy cargo airline, based out of Wilmington, Ohio, offered him a position flying decade-old Boeing 767s on overnight freight runs to Memphis and Louisville. The red-eye routes were grueling lonely and completely devoid of glamour. His first flight was a load of auto parts and Amazon packages. As he sat in the worn-out cockpit, the comforting familiar glow of the instruments was now a bitter reminder of what he had lost. While taxiing to the runway, he looked out across the airfield and saw it a gleaming, brand-new Gulfstream G700, its tail emblazoned with the sharp, clean logo of Apex Global Aviation. It was taxiing for a priority takeoff, effortlessly gliding past his lumbering cargo plane. He knew with a certainty that settled like lead in his stomach who was likely sitting in seat 1A of that jet. She was ascending, heading for Zurich, or Hong Kong, or Dubai, building her empire in the sky. He was grounded in every way that mattered, hauling boxes in the dark, a ghost of the man he used to be. The Ripple had finally reached its distant shore, leaving him shipwrecked and alone. A year is a lifetime in the world of corporate aviation, a sector where reputations are as fragile as the whisper-thin wings of a glider, and just as susceptible to the unpredictable winds of public opinion. 12 months after the Teterboro incident, the trajectories of all involved had not just diverged, they had rocketed into entirely different stratospheres, each a testament to the inexorable physics of cause and effect. Apex Global Aviation was now the undisputed king of the sky. Their marketing department, with surgical precision, had crafted a campaign centered around the slogan, "Apex, the standard is respect." It never once mentioned Skylink, but it didn't have to. The campaign featured a diverse array of pilots and clientele, showcasing a modern, vibrant company that understood the new face of power and influence. Industry journals like Business Aviation Weekly ran cover stories on their explosive growth, attributing it to their visionary acquisition of the Aerogrant logistics portfolio. Jonathan Finch had become a celebrated CEO, lauded for his decisiveness and forward-thinking ethos. He had taken the opportunity Althea Grant had given him and transformed his company from a competitor into a hegemon. For Skylink Charters, the year had been a brutal exercise in survival. Robert Caldwell had aged a decade. His days were spent not in expansion meetings, but in damage control summits with HR consultants and PR firms. The company had been forced to sell 3 of its older aircraft to cover the financial shortfall from the lost contracts. Morale among the remaining staff was abysmal. A culture of fear and second-guessing had taken root. Every client interaction was now fraught with anxiety. The mandatory diversity training, dubbed the Skylink Cares Initiative, felt less like a genuine cultural shift and more like a court-mandated penance. Caldwell knew that rebuilding trust both internally and externally would be the fight of his life, a slow, arduous climb back from a reputational abyss dug by one man's prejudice. The most profound change, however, was not in the corporate balance sheets, but in the lives Althea Grant had chosen to impact. Her Ascend initiative, funded by a significant personal endowment and backed by Apex's corporate muscle, was already a resounding success. Its first scholarship recipient was a young woman named Maria Flores from San Antonio. The daughter of an aircraft mechanic, Maria had dreamed of being a pilot, but had seen the path to the cockpit of a private jet as utterly unattainable. The Ascend initiative had not only paid for her flight school and advanced certifications, but had also paired her with a female Apex captain as a mentor. Althea had met her a month prior, seeing in the young woman's bright, determined eyes the same fire that had fueled her own journey. Maria wasn't just learning to fly a plane. She was learning that the sky did in fact belong to everyone. This, Althea knew, was the true return on her investment. This new role as a public figure and mentor brought her to Geneva, to the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Grand Hotel, for the European Aerospace Summit. As she walked through the marble lobby, she was no longer an anonymous figure. Heads turned. Industry titans who might have once overlooked her now stepped forward to shake her hand, their eyes filled with a mixture of awe and calculated respect. She was no longer just the CEO of Aerogrant. She was a power broker, a living symbol of a paradigm shift. Waiting for her in the speaker's lounge was Captain David Chen. Seeing him in his crisp Apex uniform, the 4 stripes of a captain gleaming on his epaulets brought a genuine smile to Althea's face. Apex had fast-tracked his career, recognizing the integrity and calm leadership he had displayed under fire. He was one of their best. "Dr. Grant," he greeted her, his handshake firm. "The G700 is fully prepped for your departure this evening. We've already filed a flight plan that should have you back in New York with time to spare." "Thank you, Captain," she said. "I confess I'm more nervous about this speech than I was about closing the Zurich deal last year." He smiled. "You'll be great. I just wanted to say thank you again. Not just for the recommendation, but for what you did. The atmosphere at Skylink after you left? It was difficult. What you forced them to confront needed to happen." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You made the industry better, Dr. Grant. Safer for people who don't fit the old mold." His words meant more to her than any financial gain. It was the confirmation that her decision, born of necessity and dignity, had created a positive protective ripple for others. "That means a great deal, David. Fly safe." At that very moment, 5,000 miles away, in the dark, rain-swept sky over rural Kentucky, Richard Thorne was beginning his descent into Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky International Airport, a major cargo hub. The cockpit of the aging 767 freighter was a world away from the silent luxury of a Gulf Stream. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and ozone from the old CRT screens. His co-pilot was a gruff, monosyllabic man half his age who was more interested in his phone than the flight. Thorne's life had shrunk to these lonely nocturnal corridors of the sky. His marriage had not survived the freefall. The shame and financial ruin had been too heavy a cargo for it to bear. His days were spent in cheap airport motels, his nights spent hauling consumer goods and industrial parts from one anonymous warehouse to another. Tonight the radio chatter was a dull drone until a new voice cut through. "Cincinnati approach. Apex 71. Victor descending through flight level 200. The controller's voice immediately became more alert, more deferential. "Apex 71. Victor, roger that. Expect visual approach, runway 18, right? Welcome to Cincinnati." The voice from the Apex jet was smooth, professional and familiar. "Visual for 18, right, thank you, approach. Apex 71, Victor." Thorne knew that call sign. He knew that voice. It was David Chen. He pictured him in the pristine, state-of-the-art cockpit of a brand-new jet, perhaps flying a high-powered executive to a meeting with Procter & Gamble. The contrast with his own reality, the flickering caution light he needed to get maintenance to check the peeling paint on the yoke in his hands, was a physical ache in his chest. The bitterness that had sustained him for months was gone, eroded by the relentless grind of solitude and regret. There was no one left to blame. He had been the architect of his own desolation. He had judged a person's worth by their cover, and in doing so, had torn out the most valuable pages of his own life story. Back in Geneva, Althea stepped onto the brightly lit stage to a wave of sustained applause. She stood at the podium, a figure of composed power, and waited for the room to fall silent. She looked out at the faces of the most powerful people in her industry. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and clear, amplified throughout the vast hall. "A little over a year ago, a man told me I didn't belong in the front of an airplane. He was wrong. But the incident taught me a valuable lesson. It taught me that in any industry, in any room, there are two types of power, the power of the position and the power of the person. The power of a position is temporary. It's a uniform, a title, a seat in row 1. It can be taken away. the power of the person, however, the power that comes from integrity, from expertise, from the courage to build something from nothing that is permanent. She paused, letting the words sink in. That captain made a bad decision. He mistook the power of his uniform for true authority. He failed to see the person in the seat, and in doing so, he put his company on a trajectory that led to disaster. My response was not emotional. It was a business decision. It was a recalibration. I simply chose to align my company with a partner whose trajectory was pointed towards the future, not the past. The future of this industry, she continued, her voice rising with passion, is not just about faster jets or more efficient engines. It's about recognizing that talent, leadership, and value do not come in one color, one gender, or one style of dress. The most valuable asset on any manifest is human potential. By excluding people, by making them feel they don't belong, you are grounding your own company. You are choosing to fly with half your engines out. The real bottom line is this: creating a culture of respect isn't just the right thing to do. It is the only profitable, sustainable, and powerful way to move forward. So yes, she concluded, her eyes scanning the captivated audience. It is not enough to simply earn your place at the table. Sometimes you have to be willing to flip that table over and build a better, stronger, more inclusive one in its place. Thank you. The silence held for a heartbeat, and then the room erupted. It was not just applause. It was a roar of approval, a standing ovation. Althea Grant stood in the warm glow of the stage lights, a quiet revolution embodied in a single person. She had not just changed her flight plan that day. She had altered the flight path of an entire industry, setting it on a new and far better trajectory. The story of Dr. Althea Grant and Captain Thorne is a powerful real-world reminder that the ground can shift beneath our feet in an instant. It shows how prejudice, no matter how casually expressed, carries a cost, and that karma in the corporate world often comes in the form of a terminated contract and a shattered reputation. One person's quiet dignity, when challenged, revealed a strength that could move mountains of money and reshape an entire industry. It's a testament to the fact that true power isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but about having the conviction and the resources to ensure your voice is the last one heard. If this story of justice and consequence resonated with you, and if you believe that respect is non-negotiable at any altitude, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with others who appreciate stories of empowerment, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories where karma isn't just a concept, but a final destination. Thank you for listening.